We're back with more Seattle Real Estate Radio with your hosts, Christian Nossum and Dan Keller.
All right, hey, welcome back to Seattle Real Estate Radio here on KKOL 1300 AM. We are here today with Stacey Romberg. I'm really excited to talk with Stacey. She's a probate attorney, and we're going to learn a lot about probate law, I guess, today. So one of the things I want to do real quickly for our listeners, so you guys have a better idea of who Stacey actually is. Stacey Romberg is a Seattle attorney practicing law in the areas of probate, estate planning, and business law. She's a native of Idaho, where she attended Idaho State University on a tennis scholarship, before getting her law degree from the University of Idaho and LL.M. degree from Georgetown University Law Center. Did I butcher that?
No, that was excellent. You did a great job.
All right. Stacey proudly serves on the board of a Seattle area non-for-profit tennis outreach programs, TOPS, and we are really, really excited to have her here today.
We are. So you are from the Palouse.
You went to school.
You went to school in the
I
Palouse.
went to school in the Palouse.
Yeah, I went to school in the Palouse too. I went to WSU though, so I mean, right there.
Neighbors.
Yeah, exactly. So we're really excited to have you on the show today. One thing is, so you have great reviews on Yelp, and when I drive around every weekend, I see estate sale and probate. And could you explain to our audience what is probate?
Sure, absolutely. So every time that someone dies, their estate needs to be administered in some way. Mm-hmm. So who's in charge?
Right.
Who gets what? What assets do they receive? And that's going to be governed by one of three things, which is, one, their will, if they have one. Mm-hmm. If they don't have one, it'll be governed by intestate succession. And what that is it's a statutory scheme about who receives your property. Or if someone has a revocable living trust, that'll govern who gets what and who's in charge.
Okay.
So my job, really, as a probate attorney, I'm doing one of two things. One, I'm helping the fiduciary, the person in charge. I'm helping them figure out what they're supposed to do in managing the estate.
Okay.
And on the flip side of the coin, what I might be doing is representing a beneficiary who might be a little bit cranky, who might think that things aren't being done appropriately, and feels like they need counsel to help them.
So how do you deal with that when the emotions are so high in situations like that, when you have to handle the beneficiary?
It can be very difficult. You know, I'm thinking about a situation a while ago that one of my colleagues billed, honestly, over $21,000, he had told me, because the family was fighting over a china set that was worth about $4,000.
Wow.
And he continued to present the bills to his clients, continued to say, this is irrational. I would prefer not to be doing this. I think this should be settled. And it was just, the principle of the thing that they had to continue on and fight about that. So I think it's really important to explain to the clients that, some things are just not worth going to the mat over.
Right.
Because the fees are too high, it's too difficult, or maybe they don't even have a very strong legal basis for their argument.
Right. Okay. So can you give us a brief description of the probate process and, how long does it take?
Probate, at its minimum, here in Washington, will take 4 months.
Wow.
4 months from the date of appointment. And why 4 months? Is because that is the time after the personal representative is appointed. There is a notice to creditors that's published, and probably a lot of you have seen that. In the little newspapers, you'll see these creditor notices and think, what's that? But from the date of publication, the creditors have 4 months to raise their claims, so you have to wait and give them that 4-month period. Okay. And then, provided everything else is done in terms of dealing with the assets, dealing with any tax issues that need to be done, et cetera, it can go ahead and be closed.
Right. Okay. So say I had a spouse and I died. How do you deal with that when one person dies in with probate and whatnot?
when one person dies and you're married.
Right.
And I mean, there's so many different factors to that.
Right.
You know, do you have a will? Do you not have a will?
Okay.
In the very easiest scenario, or one of the easiest ones that I like to see, is the idea husband and wife, they have gone to an attorney. They have a non-taxable estate, meaning no Washington estate tax, no federal estate tax owed. They've entered into a community property agreement, which is a very short agreement that their attorney helped them with that simply says, you know, what's mine is yours, what yours is mine. People think that's automatic. Oh, well, of course it's community property. Not necessarily.
Oh.
So having that sort of agreement is really important. And if you have that agreement, oftentimes you can go ahead, you can record the community property agreement and record a quitclaim deed.
Okay.
And voila, the property is yours.
Oh,
That's
wow.
the simplest thing. If people do that, I'm always so happy that they can take that step. But other times it may be, you know, that a full probate is needed in order to transfer title.
Okay.
So I heard you say will. That's the importance of having a will. If you have a will, it makes your job much easier. It makes the process much easier, right?
Yes. And oftentimes people are nervous because they don't want to spend the money for a will. And they spend so much more money because they didn't have it.
Yeah. Ouch. Yep.
So how messy can things get without a will?
Oh, my gosh. I have so many different examples of things that... one example that I think is really compelling that I've seen a number of times in my practice is suppose, again, husband and wife.
Okay.
And a lot of times, you know, folks live together and they're living in a house that one person or the other inherited from their parents. So an inheritance, generally speaking, is your separate property.
Okay.
So let's suppose the wife got the house from the parents. The husband and wife have been living in the house for 30 years. The husband just assumes that it's his house too. You know, they're continuing on. They don't get wills.
Right.
She dies. She has children from a prior marriage. Guess what? Pursuant to the laws of the intestate succession that I referenced before, that house is actually split. So half of it is going to belong to the husband that survived, and the other half is going to belong to the kids from the prior marriage. So what do? Does the husband have enough money to pay off the kids in terms of their share of the equity in that house? Hopefully he does, so that he can continue to live there. But if he doesn't, guess what? Then you have to sell the house.
Right.
And you have to split the proceeds, which is probably the last thing that either that husband or that wife ever would have thought would have happened, and not what anybody would have wanted, but they didn't do proper preparation.
Right. And so what I'm hearing you say, you need to prepare for these types of situations. I feel like this is a situation where people kind of put it on the back burner. And
I'm not
when it actually comes into play, you know, when the situation does happen, it's like, oh, what do we do now? And it's like everyone's scrambling to try to get everything figured out. So yeah, it's pretty difficult. Wow. So if you don't have a large estate, do you still need a probate attorney?
Well, there is a statutory mechanism here in Washington to allow for estate administration without a probate for estates that are under $100,000. But nonetheless, you still really need to contact an attorney no matter what, because you need to find out what's going on. And a lot of times people, it's great to DIY, do it, on your own for, maybe fixing your floor.
Right.
It's not a good DIY situation for some of these estate administration cases. And you can really make some serious mistakes that cost a lot of money to clean up.
Right. So if you're buying a home that is in the probate process, what can a buyer expect?
Oh my gosh.
Can a house even go on the market in the probate process?
Yes.
Okay.
And it should. I mean, once a personal representative has been appointed by the court, which is an important point.
Right.
Because sometimes people just assume, oh, grandma died. Her will says I'm the personal representative.
Right.
I guess I'm the personal representative. Right. No, you aren't. You're not the personal representative unless a judge says that you are.
Right.
And you have a court order that says that you are. So once you have that court order in hand, and that court order says one magical thing, which is non-intervention powers. And that means basically that you can proceed in a normal way without having to run back to court all the time and say, Mother, may I do this or that?
Right.
So once you have that in hand, it's a great idea, if you can prepare the house for sale and get it sold.
Okay.
So the biggest question is, if we find a house, or if I've got a client that comes to me and wants to buy a house that's in probate, the big question would be like, what part of the process are you in? Because you're saying it can last up to 4 months.
It can even last years.
Or years, got it. So which part of the process are you in? What part of the process are you in? Where we're at? What are some other questions that we could ask?
I think what part of the process that you're in, the most important thing, if from the buyer's perspective, because one, does the personal representative, have they been appointed? Are they able to sell? They can be appointed on day 2. They can be appointed, 3 years into the process.
So assuming the home is listed, they should have the right to list it.
Yes.
So at that point, then there's numerous variables, like you just mentioned.
Right.
And they have to be really careful because they have to realize it's not a normal sale.
Yeah.
Right.
My job as a probate attorney is to protect my personal representatives. And I tell my clients, I said, that's not your house. Yeah. So you shouldn't take on any of the responsibilities that a normal seller has in a purchase and sale transaction. So what do I mean by that? Specifically, all through the process, from the listing agreement to the purchase and sale agreement, down to the deed, I just really want that buttoned up to make it clear that the personal representative is making no warranties whatsoever about that property.
Right.
Simply,
so is that then you would be helping them, advising them to complete those forms then?
Exactly. Yeah. I work very closely with the real estate agents on all steps of the process.
And in this case, there is no seller's disclosure either. For the most part, they're all
correct.
They're waived.
And that makes sense, actually, when you think it through, because how could you be really expected to disclose something in a house that's not yours?
Exactly.
So you're just buying it as is, correct?
Right.
So it's so important for the buyers to take that extra step and realize that, and really make sure that they're inspecting the property well. That they make sure, if there's any sort of boundary issues or encroachments or things like that, they can't come back and say, well, gosh, seller, that's your responsibility, because it's really not.
Right.
They have to get it figured out.
Exactly. So in a situation like this, that's when they have to really read that title report, because it's not a typical title report. So they have to go through it, scour it, and get with the title company, have them explain what different things mean to, so they have a clear understanding of what they're getting into.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So taxes. Doing the last tax return, how does that relate to homes and a real estate aspect?
What I think you might be saying is that yes, taxes still have to be done when somebody is deceased.
Right.
Let's do this because I want to jump in on this because this is important, and we're getting prompted to go to break. So let's do this. Let's address this question when we come back. How does that sound?
That sounds great.
Okay, we'll be back here in a minute. Stay tuned for more with Stacey Romberg.
We're back with more Seattle Real Estate Radio with your hosts, Christian Nossum and Dan Keller.
I am not Christian Nossum, but I'm Les Cutting with the Awesome Nossum Group, and we are here with Stacey Romberg, attorney at law. She's a probate attorney, and we're talking probate.
We are, and it's not. I wouldn't say it's not a sexy topic, but it's a very important topic.
Very important.
Death is sexy.
Right? No, but you'd be, it's seriously like I drive around neighborhoods so many, like every weekend, estate sale. So it happens a lot, more times than not. But it's like I said, it's an issue that people put on the back burner and they don't want to talk about. But when the time comes, what do you do? Yeah. And that's why we have Stacey here to guide us in the right direction.
Well, we were talking right before we went to break in regards to some, tax issues. So, for example, let's say there are taxes owed on the property, back taxes, property taxes. Explain to us how that's handled.
Well, ideally, that's a estate-related expense, so that those taxes should be paid out of estate assets. Okay. And that's one thing that's very important, I think, as part of your pre-planning, as part of your estate planning, because, there's unfortunately, a lot of folks that die and they're sort of, real property rich and cash poor, and they don't have a lot of money in their estate to take care of things, which is when life insurance becomes particularly important.
Oh.
But otherwise, if the estate is lacking in funds, hopefully there are family members that are able to pony up the funds and be able to pay that and then receive the funds back once the property sells.
Yeah, so there's numerous ways where you could approach this, where let's say there's $10,000 in property taxes that are owed, but there's also $400,000 equity in the property.
Exactly.
And so, you can work with family members to, hey, we're going to take care of this, or one may take care of this, or a family member may already be appointed if they had a will, correct? Yep. So, okay, good questions. Well, it's my turn to kind of throw a few at you. I like to play more of a reality type situation when I ask my questions as a co-host. So let's say, for example, I have a relative that passes and they leave the house to me. Two parts of this question. Let's say the house has equity, and let's say the house doesn't have equity. So part A, the house has plenty of equity. What do I do next? What is next in the process? And then if the house does not have equity, how do we handle that as well?
Unfortunately, we're in a market here in Seattle that, generally speaking, it's the former, and they have equity. House is left to you. Keep in mind, the house is not yours unless it's distributed to you and you have the deed, because a lot of people think that it's just, again, theirs because it says so in the will, or, and that's not necessarily the case.
So the probate process will then get me on the deed, or put the deed in my name.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
And there's equity. That's great. It's your property. You can do with it as you choose.
So let's say there's a mortgage on the property.
There's a mortgage on the property.
I've got the deed, but the mortgage needs to be paid, period, or the bank will start foreclosing. So let's say, for example, my grandfather passes, gives me the house, I get the deed in my name, but he has a $200,000 mortgage on it. So I know that he's
first
passed.
You deal with, I probably wouldn't transfer that property automatically to the heir without dealing with the mortgage company first.
And just
and the
informing
mortgage
them.
company, has a secured interest.
Okay.
That secured interest doesn't go away because somebody is deceased, nor does the mortgage obligation go away because somebody is deceased. And again, just like we were talking about the taxes, that is a key situation where life insurance can come into play and be so important in making sure there's enough assets, say, to cover that mortgage payment for 6 or 8 months while the probate proceeding is pending, so you don't put that on the heirs.
Okay. So I get the deed in my name. The next part of the process would just then be to sell the house, correct?
If you choose to.
If I choose to, or keep it, it's in my name. Okay. If there is a mortgage on it, does that involve refinancing? Is that where I can come into play and have it refinanced, or what happens next? Or do we just keep it in their name? Do they add my name now to the note?
Sometimes the mortgage company will agree to do that.
Okay.
Sometimes if, of course there are foreclosures in the estate process, and if there is a deficiency, the mortgage company can file what's known as a creditor's claim in the probate proceeding, and then any remaining assets that the deceased person had, the mortgage company can just be an unsecured creditor, just like any other creditor, and go in and try to get their share of the pie.
Wow.
Okay. Craziness. Yeah. This is these are questions and answers that we don't want to always deal with right now while we're alive and we're healthy and everything's good.
But it's exactly when we should be dealing with those questions.
That's exactly what we had Bill Kessler on here not too long ago, and that's what he said. Now's the time when you're coherent enough to deal with them, and you can actually put together a plan. So, no, great info. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. What are some of the most complicated situations when it comes to real estate during or in the probate process, and how do you kind of unwind such catastrophes, if you will?
Well, let's talk about a really basic one first that I find being very common, and that's the issue of property insurance. Okay. So let's say, grandma dies. She was alone in the house. So nobody's in the house right now. It's just a purely vacant property, and, they're dealing with it in a probate scenario. house burns to the ground.
Right.
So what do? You contact the property insurance folks, and they say, so what do you mean grandma wasn't living in the house for 3 months and it was completely vacant? Well, we have a clause here in our insurance contract that says that you need to notify us if the house was vacant, and so sorry, but you don't have coverage for this.
Wow.
It's really, really important. That's one of the first things that
wow.
I encourage our personal representatives to do, is to contact the insurance company, inform them of the death, inform them that the house is vacant, and you can get little rider policies to cover that period of the probate to avoid that horrible scenario from happening.
Wow.
Very important.
That's a huge aha right there. I mean, you wouldn't even think, wouldn't even have thought of that. It's crazy. Wow.
You know, another issue that happens, which you can all imagine, is that sometimes people just don't agree what to do. So let's say, pursuant to the will, there's 3 kids, and they split everything, so the 3 kids get the house. 2 of the kids are absolutely on the same page. They think, okay, this house is in horrible disrepair. Maybe the market's a little slow. Let's hang on to this thing for a while. Let's get it fixed. Then as the house gets better and the market recovers, then we can sell it. But, there's always that one kid.
Right.
The third wheel.
Yeah, the third wheel is like, no,
Yeah.
I disagree with you, and I want my cash, and I want my cash now. I see that a lot. How do you handle that? Especially, ideally, there would be some liquidity in the estate, so you could just pay the third kid off and be able to have the other 2 kids handle the house the way they want. Sometimes, and we're really lucky here in Washington, we have some of the best, to give you a little background, we have some of the best probate proceedings in the United States in terms of how streamlined it is. And we also have a really wonderful thing called TEDRA. TEDRA stands for the Trust and Estates Dispute Resolution Act.
Okay.
It was one of its first in kind in the country, and it makes it pretty easy to be able to settle these sorts of disputes.
Okay.
And there's a whole procedure for how you can settle that. So ideally, the family can reach some sort of a settlement agreement so that it won't be torn apart. Other issues that I see, issues about, rental property.
Okay.
Suppose, the person who died owns residential rental property, and they own it in their own name. They never formed an LLC and put the property into that. So now, guess what? The estate owns the rental property. That means all the leases need to be reviewed. Those tenants need to be switched over because they're now tenants of the estate. The estate is the landlord. The rent checks need to go to the estate of the deceased person, and the personal representative is going to be the one who's responsible for everything related to that property until it gets addressed.
Wow.
Yeah. One thing that I've seen, which is just heartbreaking, and I've seen this a number of times, is homeowner dies, several kids. There's one child who, maybe is in his 30s or his 40s, and that kid has never left the house. That kid has been there since the time he was born. Some of these kids are, mentally, or now they're adults, they're mentally disabled in some way. What do you do?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, do you let them just live there forever? How do you create mechanisms for that? You know, I've had issues where, the police had to come and take these, screaming people out of the house, which it just tears the family up, and it's absolutely horrible.
Right.
So, I mean, again, advanced planning in terms of maybe a special needs trust, or how, the housing for this person can be handled upon death. Those things are so critical to avoid those sorts of tragic scenarios.
Wow.
So from what I'm hearing you say, if somebody doesn't have a will, that's really, I mean, obviously probate comes into play regardless, but that's really where it gets kind of crazy for you, where when things like this happen and there is no will in place and there's kids and there's assets, that is the probate process. Figuring out who gets what, how it's divided, how things are taken care of, correct?
That's
so
a
coming
very good
kind of
explanation.
full
That's terrific.
circle, that's kind of how it works out, huh?
Exactly.
Okay.
Very great explanation.
So I love what you just said. The easiest way to remedy, there's always going to be problems, but the easiest way to remedy most of them is to be proactive when you can. Proactive when you can put together a plan and a will.
And go talk to your attorney about it. And, these are things a lot of times that folks are embarrassed to talk to their attorney about. But it's exactly what the attorney needs to know.
Right.
Like, my child is a raging alcoholic,
Right.
and if I give them their share of the estate, they're going to go to Las Vegas and drink it in about a month. So how can we avoid that? You know, if you don't have that conversation with the
Upfront,
attorney,
right.
how in the world is the attorney going to know?
So just
be able
maybe
to-
giving minor distributions versus here's
Or
your
putting it in a
200,000.
trust.
Or there you go. Okay, good. Okay, so here's the thing. I want to kind of wrap up with Stacey and give kind of a plug. We love to do this with all of our guests. I want you to reach out to her. She's super valuable, tons of resources here. So Stacey Romberg, again, attorney at law, is a Seattle, Washington-based virtual law firm. The firm represents clients in estate planning, probate, and business law. Stacey and her team are enthusiastically dedicated to developing positive and productive long-term relationships with great clients. Schedule your initial consultation at staceyromberg.com. I'm not going to necessarily spell that out on air, but we're going to have all of her contact info on our website, on our social media page. Stacey, closing thoughts. We've got about 20 seconds.
Well, thank you for having me on today.
Yeah.
It was
Thank you
my
for coming.
pleasure.
Absolutely.
And I hope through this people understand a little bit more about the probate process and that they realize they need to do some advanced planning.
Well, you did a great job. I learned a ton. StaceyRomberg.com. I am going to spell it out. STACEY, Romberg, ROMBERG.com. Reach out to us. Reach out to Stacey. She's a huge resource. Thank you so much for coming on today.
And it'll also be on SeattleRealEstateRadio.com.
Yep, on the site. So, hey, we'll
Thank
see
you.
Yeah, we'll see you next week. Until then, have a great
Stay
week.
tuned. There's more Seattle Real Estate Radio coming up.